Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zakeya Sanad, and my paper is about testing the relationship between board diversity and earnings management practices. So this is the overview of my presentation. I'll start by the introduction, and then I'll talk about the board diversity aspects, moving to earnings management methods. And then I'm gonna review the previous studies that talked about the board diversity and earnings management, and at the end, I'll talk about the conclusion. So when we think about a typical board in any firm for so many years, so it will be something like this. So if we have a look at it, we'll see that there is we'll see the men are dominated, and they might have shared the same characteristics. They might have the same background. They might share the same, childhood. Maybe they went to the same school as well. So until recently, we can see that this pattern is also the same in different boards. For example, this is a board picture in 2013, which shows that still men directors are dominated. So if we go back to different financial scandals that happened, it raised so many questions regarding the board diversity. And of course, they all agree that having more diverse board can result in more board independence. And accordingly, they can avoid any future financial scandals. So based on the literature, so many researchers try to categorize the board diversity into different categories. So for example, in this figure, you can see that the statutory and the demographic, we have two categories. And the statutory, of course, includes the board independence, the board committees, membership, and board chair. And at the same time, we have the demographic characteristics, which includes the task-oriented diversity, relations-oriented, which includes, of course, the age, nationality, gender, and the education and experience. So what we can notice in here, an author raised a concern regarding the board diversity. If we go back and see the corporate governance codes, for instance, we see that they focus mainly on the statutory diversity, which, for example, the board independence and so on. So we really need to shed more lights on the demographic attributes, because, of course, it can contribute in diversifying the boards in general. So you might say that this study might be a little bit old, but if we go and see a recent study published by Harvard Business Review also agreed on the importance of having a demographic diversified board. So we need to shed lights more on the gender, race, and age diversity. So part of the demographic attributes, we have, of course, the gender diversity, which is a very hot topic. We know that many studies try to investigate and see how women characteristics can affect the board effectiveness in general. So, and again, of course, they will mention how their characteristics are different from men, which can, influence the board decisions, such as they are risk averse, they are less aggressive, they are less overconfident. So this is a very interesting diversity, which is the age diversity. A report by the PwR showed that only 6% of the directors in the S&P 500 board seats represents only the younger directors. So they said that the age diversity does not attract the same attention. So we need to pay more attention with regards to the age diversity as well. Moving to the nationality diversity, the studies show that the directors from other nationalities usually are more independent than the local directors. So what I have mentioned earlier, it can be reflected in the real life situation. For example, if we can compare, I just add the paragraph from the UK Corporate Governance Code just to compare in 2010 and in 2019. In 2010, they just talk about it in general, the diversity, but if we go and see in 2019, they talk more about they mention it specifically, the gender, social, ethnic background, and so on. So this shows that this issue is really important. So from the earnings management perspective, of course, earnings management, it represents the actions done by the managers to influence the firm's earnings and sometimes for their benefit. So the previous studies, they try to classify the earnings management into different methods. We have the accrual method, and we have the real earnings management and the classification shifting. So this is just a table that summarized the studies that undertook investigating the relationship between the board diversity with the earnings management. So based on my review, I've noticed that most of the study, the first thing is that they focus mainly on the statutory diversity. More attention should be paid to the demographic attributes. And the second thing is that maybe even measuring the proportion of the minority group, such as directors from different gender or age, we should also test their proportion. If they represent, let's say, 20% of the board, how they will influence the board effectiveness. Because it won't be the same when they represent, let's say, 40% of the board or 60%. So this is also important. And the main thing is that they focused on specific types of earnings management methods. They need to pay more attention to they need to test, let's say, the overall practices of earnings management. Why? Because recent studies show that managers usually use different types of earnings management at the same time. So the previous studies, they focus mainly on particular type of earnings management and just ignore the importance of combining different types of earnings management at the same time. Thank you.